The accidental diplomat. Thea Weston had been dreaming of alien contact her entire career, but not like this. She stood ankle-deep in lukewarm water, clutching a tablet in one hand and a half-empty cup of coffee in the other. The conference room had been hastily converted into what the engineering team called a suitable environment for their visitor. Essentially, they'd removed the furniture, sealed the floor, and filled it with 10 inches of salt water. "This is ridiculous," muttered Director Hammond, his expensive shoes squeaking on the platform they'd constructed around the room's perimeter. "We have a diplomatic crisis brewing, and our only qualified xenolinguist is on maternity leave. Which is why I'm here," Thea reminded him. She wasn't a diplomat. She wasn't even the department's senior linguist. She was simply the only person who had studied the preliminary Nissarian language data from the first contact team. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Thea's breath caught in her throat. Ambassador Lorith entered, or rather, flowed, into the room. The Nissarian moved like water given form, a translucent humanoid shape with opalescent membranes that rippled with each movement. Where a human might have had hair, Lorith possessed long, flowing tendrils that floated around their head like a living crown. Their eyes, 3 of them, were large, entirely black, and arranged in a triangle pattern on their face. "Welcome to Earth Station Harmony," Thea said carefully in the Nissarian language, her tongue struggling with the liquid consonants and flowing vowels that almost seemed designed to be spoken underwater. Loritha's body pulsed with bands of blue light that traveled from head to toe. "Your pronunciation is imperfect but comprehensible," they replied, their voice a strange combination of bubbling and melodic tones. "I am pleased someone has attempted our speech patterns." Director Hammond leaned over to whisper to Thea, "What are they saying?" "They appreciate that I'm speaking their language," Thea summarized, before turning back to Lorith. "I apologize for any shortcomings in my communication. I am Thea Weston, linguist and temporary liaison until our diplomatic team arrives." "I was told I would be meeting with Earth's ambassador," Lorith said, their tendrils shifting in what Thea interpreted as confusion or possibly irritation. "The matter is urgent." Thea swallowed hard. "There's been a delay. I'm authorized to begin preliminary discussions." This was a stretch of the truth. She was authorized to translate, nothing more. But something in Loritha's posture, a tension in their fluid form, told her that delay wouldn't be welcomed. "Very well," Lorith said after a moment. "The Nissarian High Council requires an immediate decision regarding the orbital paths your ships have been taking through our ancestral waters." Thea blinked. "Ancestral waters? You mean the region of space near Europa?" "The liquid realm that extends beyond your solar rim," Lorith corrected. "What you call interstellar space contains currents and tides of particles that have guided our species' migrations for millennia. Your vessels disrupt these patterns." Thea frantically translated for Hammond, who looked increasingly concerned. "Tell them we had no idea," he said. "We need time to consult with our navigational experts." Thea relayed this, but Loritha's body flashed with pulses of crimson. "Time is precisely what is lacking," they responded. "The pattern convergence approaches, a cosmic alignment that occurs once per year century. If the disturbances continue, millions will be stranded in the void." The conversation deteriorated from there. Thea struggled to translate complex astronomical and navigational concepts she barely understood herself. Hammond kept insisting they needed to consult with higher authorities, while Lorith became increasingly agitated, their bodies shifting through darker colors. "This negotiation falters," Lorith finally announced. "Perhaps we overestimated Earth's readiness for interspecies cooperation." "No, wait," Thea said, stepping closer to the Nissarian, her shoes now completely submerged. "I think I understand the problem better now. What if we created a temporary solution? A designated corridor for your people during this pattern convergence?" She hadn't been authorized to make this suggestion, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Hammond was shooting her warning glances, but she pressed on. "Earth has no desire to disrupt your cultural practices or migrations. We simply need to understand them better to accommodate them. Loritha's colors stabilized, shifting to a curious lavender. You speak with surprising clarity for one who claims not to be an ambassador. I'm just trying to find common ground, Thea said, then winced at her own choice of words. Common water would have been more appropriate. In Nissarian tradition, Lorith said, one who speaks for their people becomes bound to their words. Are you prepared for such responsibility? Before Thea could respond, Hammond cut in. Ms. Weston is not authorized to make binding agreements. We need to consult with. I accept the responsibility, Thea interrupted, her heart pounding. She knew she was overstepping, but something told her this moment was crucial. Tell me what's needed for this temporary solution. Loritha's body rippled with what might have been approval. Then let us begin the rite of temporary confluence, as is our custom when new diplomatic channels are formed. The next hour was a blur of translation challenges as Lorith explained the requirements for rerouting Earth vessels around what they called the migration streams. Thea took careful notes, occasionally consulting with Hammond, who had given up trying to rein her in and was now frantically messaging the actual diplomatic team. These terms seem reasonable, Thea finally said, reviewing her notes. I believe Earth can accommodate this temporary corridor system until we establish more permanent protocols. Then we have reached preliminary harmony, Lorith said, their color shifting to a deep, peaceful blue. Now, as is customary, we must seal this agreement with the bond of shared understanding. What does that entail? Thea asked cautiously. It is simple, Lorith explained. A temporary psychic link that ensures mutual comprehension. It lasts until the agreement is formalized. Thea hesitated, looking at Hammond, who shook his head vigorously. Is there no alternative? She asked Lorith. This is our way, Lorith replied simply. Without the bond, our leaders will not accept that true understanding has been reached. Thea took a deep breath. Then I consent to the bond. Hammond's protest was cut short as Lorith glided forward, their translucent hand extending toward Thea. As their fingertips, cool and oddly solid, touched her forehead, a rush of sensation flooded her mind. Colors she couldn't name. Sounds that felt like textures. The vast, incomprehensible feeling of drifting through space, guided by currents invisible to human senses. When she came back to herself, she was sitting on the edge of the platform, feet still in the water. Lorith hovered nearby, watching her with what seemed like concern. The bond has taken, they said, and Thea realized she could understand them perfectly now, without struggling with the language. You are now Thea who speaks for Earth, until our accord is complete. What have you done? Hammond demanded, helping Thea to her feet. It's okay, Thea said, though she wasn't entirely sure it was. Her mind felt expanded somehow, as if new neural pathways had been created. I understand things better now. The migration streams, the pattern convergence, they're not just astronomical phenomena. They're cultural lifelines. You grasp our perspective well, Lorith said, sounding pleased. The bond has chosen wisely. Chosen? Hammond asked sharply. What does that mean? The bond seeks resonance, Lorith explained. It cannot form without compatibility. Thea who speaks for Earth has an unusual capacity for understanding that which is not like herself. Thea felt a flutter of something between pride and panic. So what happens now? Now, Lorith said, you must complete the 3 trials of comprehension, as all bound representatives must. Trials? Hammond and Thea asked simultaneously. To ensure the agreement endures, Lorith explained. The first trial begins at the rising of your moon. You will need to prepare. Prepare how? Thea asked, suddenly aware that she'd stumbled into something far more complex than a simple translation job. The trial of immersion requires you to experience our world as we do, Lorith said. You will need to breathe water. Hammond sputtered in protest, but Thea felt a strange calm settle over her. Through the bond, she could sense Loritha's certainty that this was not only possible but necessary. I'll be ready, she said, surprising herself with her confidence. As Lorith departed to prepare for the trial, Hammond pulled Thea aside. "This has gone too far. You're a linguist, not a diplomat, and certainly not whatever interspecies ambassador you've just become." "I know," Thea said, looking down at her soaked shoes. "But something important is happening here. The Nissarians navigate by sensing patterns we can't even perceive. Their entire culture depends on these cosmic migrations. If we disrupt them..." "That's not your problem to solve," Hammond insisted. Thea touched her forehead where Loritha's fingers had been. "It is now. The bond has made it my problem." She looked up at Hammond with newfound resolve. "And I think I can solve it." As she gathered her things to prepare for the first trial, Thea wondered what she had gotten herself into. She had always wanted to understand alien cultures, to bridge the gap between different ways of perceiving reality. Now she was about to find out if she could literally breathe underwater, all because she tried to be helpful at a diplomatic meeting. Some days, being a linguist was more complicated than anyone could have warned her. Tides of understanding. The laboratory hummed with activity as Thea sat on the examination table, surrounded by concerned scientists and one very irritated Director Hammond. "The respiratory modification will be temporary," Dr. Lawson explained, adjusting the settings on a device that looked unsettlingly like a breathing mask crossed with an octopus. "The nanomembrane will allow oxygen extraction from water while protecting your lung tissue. But I must emphasize, this is experimental technology. And completely unnecessary," Hammond added. "We've contacted the diplomatic corps. The actual ambassador will arrive within 48 hours. Thea touched her temple, where she could still feel the ghostly coolness of Loritha's touch. "The bond doesn't work that way. I'm the representative now, until the agreement is complete." "You're a linguist who got in over her head," Hammond countered. "Maybe," Thea conceded. "But I'm also the only human who can sense the migration streams now. Through the bond, I understand what's at stake." She didn't mention the dreams she'd had last night, vast currents of particles flowing through space, carrying millions of Nissarian vessels along invisible highways. She'd felt their joy, their cultural significance, their desperation as human ships unknowingly disrupted the patterns. Dr. Lawson cleared her throat. "The procedure is ready whenever you are, Ms. Weston." Thea nodded. "Let's begin." An hour later, she stood at the edge of what the station staff had quickly constructed as a trial chamber, essentially an oversized tank filled with a specially formulated liquid that approximated Nissarian physiological needs. Lorith waited inside, their body undulating gracefully beneath the surface. "Are you certain about this?" Dr. Lawson asked as she helped Thea into a sleek wetsuit designed to regulate her body temperature in the tank. "The nanomembrane should work, but if anything feels wrong, signal immediately and we'll extract you." "I understand," Thea said, fitting the breathing apparatus over her face. It felt strange, not quite a mask, more like a second skin that adhered to her face and extended down into her throat. She stepped to the edge of the tank, took one last breath of air, and descended into the water. The first moments were pure panic. Her body screamed that this was wrong, that water in her lungs meant death. But slowly, the nanomembrane activated, extracting oxygen from the liquid and delivering it to her bloodstream. The sensation was bizarre, her chest moved as if breathing, but with a heavy, liquid resistance. "The trial of immersion begins," Lorith said, their voice perfectly clear underwater. "To understand the Nissarian way, you must perceive as we perceive." Thea tried to speak and discovered that the nanomembrane somehow allowed it, translating her vocal vibrations through the liquid. "I'm ready," she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. Lorith extended their hand, and Thea took it. Immediately, her perception shifted. The water around them wasn't just water anymore, it was alive with currents, micro-movements, temperature variations, and subtle chemical signatures. She could feel the way Loritha's presence created ripples that bounced off the tank walls and returned with information. "This is how you see the world," Thea said in wonder. "This is but a shadow of our perception," Lorith corrected. In open space, the streams carry memories, histories, guidance. We do not merely travel through space, we read it, as you might read a map with landmarks and warnings. For the next hour, Lorith guided Thea through exercises in perception. They released different substances into the water, minerals, organic compounds, temperature variations, teaching her to distinguish between them without using her eyes. The migration streams function similarly, Lorith explained. Each carries a distinct signature that guides our people home. By the time Thea emerged from the tank, gasping as the nanomembrane was carefully removed, she understood what needed to be done. We need to map the streams, she told Hammond, who had watched the entire trial with a mixture of horror and fascination. Not just their locations, but their compositions. If our ships can detect what the Nessarians perceive naturally, we can navigate around them. And how exactly do we do that? Hammond asked. I believe I can help with that, Thea said. The bond, it's given me a reference point. The second trial came the following day. Thea stood on the observation deck of the station, facing the vast expanse of space beyond the transparent aluminum viewport. Lorith hovered beside her, their body slightly less fluid in the air but still graceful. The trial of perception requires you to see beyond seeing, they explained. To feel the currents that flow between stars. Hammond and a small team of scientists watched from a respectful distance, recording devices ready. Lorith placed their hand on the viewport, and Thea did the same. The cool surface beneath her palm seemed to dissolve, not physically but perceptually, as if the barrier between her and space had become meaningless. Close your eyes, Lorith instructed. The streams are not visible to human sight. Thea obeyed, and in the darkness behind her eyelids, patterns began to emerge. Flowing lines of energy, some barely detectable, others pulsing with the combined consciousness of thousands of travelers. There, she whispered, pointing without opening her eyes. The main convergence point will be just beyond Jupiter's orbit in 17 days. And there, her hand moved to indicate another region, that's where our research vessels have been crossing the tertiary stream. When she finally opened her eyes, the scientists were frantically taking notes. Hammond looked stunned. We'll need to reconfigure the deep space telemetry network, one of the scientists said. If we can calibrate our sensors to detect these particle variations. The next 12 hours were a blur of technical discussions, simulations, and mapping exercises. Thea found herself translating not just language but perception, trying to explain how the Nessarian sense of space differed from human understanding. It's not just about avoiding collisions, she explained to the navigation team. The streams themselves are living cultural artifacts. Disrupting them is like erasing ancient pathways or destroying historical monuments. By evening, they had developed a preliminary detection system that could identify the major migration streams. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The final trial awaits, Lorith announced when they returned to the modified conference room. The trial of communion. Thea had been dreading this one. Through the bond, she had sensed it would be the most challenging, not physically, but emotionally. What does it entail, she asked, though she already had an inkling. Truth, Lorith said simply. Complete and unfiltered exchange of understanding. It is how our people forge lasting diplomatic ties. The room had been cleared except for a small circular platform rising from the water. Thea and Lorith sat facing each other, knees almost touching. This is a private matter, Lorith told the observers. The communion must occur without interference. Reluctantly, Hammond and the others left the room. Now, Lorith said, their voice gentle, we must share that which makes us who we are. They placed both hands on either side of Thea's face, and the bond between them flared to life with an intensity that made her gasp. Memories flowed between them like water, Thea's childhood fascination with languages, the loss of her father when she was 16, her struggle through graduate school, her wonder at first contact. And from Lorith came equally personal revelations, their maturation in the deep currents of Europa, their selection as a diplomatic representative against their initial wishes, their fear that humans might never truly understand the importance of the migration streams. You didn't want this role either, Thea realized, speaking both aloud and through the bond. I was a historian, Lorith confirmed. But when the disruptions began, I was the only one who had studied ancient human communication patterns. Thea laughed softly. We're both accidental diplomats. Perhaps that is why the bond chose us, Lorith suggested. We see beyond the boundaries of our assigned roles. The communion deepened, moving beyond personal history to cultural understanding. Thea experienced millennia of Nessarian migration cycles, the profound spiritual significance of following the same cosmic pathways their ancestors had traveled. Lorith, in turn, absorbed humanity's relentless curiosity, its drive to explore and understand even at great risk. When they finally separated, Thea felt both exhausted and exhilarated. The trials are complete, Lorith announced. The bond has been fulfilled. What happens now? Thea asked, suddenly aware that whatever connection they had formed would soon end. Now we formalize the agreement, Lorith said. Your people will adjust their navigation patterns to preserve our migration streams. My people will share our perceptual technology to prevent future misunderstandings. And the bond? Loritha's colors shifted to a soft, almost wistful blue. It will fade as its purpose concludes. But not all understanding will be lost. 2 days later, Thea stood in the same conference room where it had all begun. The water had been drained, the furniture returned. Ambassador Jensen, the official Earth representative who had finally arrived, signed the formal agreement with the Nessarian High Council via holographic connection. You've done remarkable work, Ms. Weston, Jensen told her afterward. Averting a diplomatic crisis and establishing a technological exchange program in the span of 3 days is unprecedented. I had help, Thea said, glancing at Lorith, who stood nearby, their forms supported by a personal hydration field. She could still feel the bond between them, though it had diminished to a faint awareness, like the memory of music rather than the song itself. The modified sensors are already being installed on our deep space vessels, Hammond reported, looking more pleased than Thea had ever seen him. Early tests suggest they're detecting the migration streams with 87% accuracy. It will improve, Lorith said confidently. As your understanding grows. When it was time for Lorith to depart, Thea accompanied them to the docking bay. They stood before the Nessarian vessel, a beautiful craft that resembled a giant opal suspended in liquid light. Will I ever see you again? Thea asked. The streams connect all things, Lorith replied. And now you can perceive them, at least in part. I don't know if I can, without the bond. Loritha's tendrils moved in what Thea now recognized as their version of a smile. Not all connections require physical proximity to endure. You have carried my perspective within you, as I have carried yours. That changes us both in ways that cannot be undone. They reached out one final time, touching Thea's forehead in the gesture that had started everything. Until the streams cross again, Thea who speaks for Earth. As Loritha's ship departed, merging with one of the invisible currents that flowed through space, Thea stood at the viewport. She closed her eyes, focusing her awareness outward. For just a moment, she thought she could still sense it, the vast, complex network of pathways threading between stars, carrying travelers, history, and connection. The bond might be fading, but the understanding it had brought would remain. Two species, perceiving reality in fundamentally different ways, had found a way to share the same space without diminishing each other. That, Thea decided, was diplomacy at its best, accidental or otherwise.